Adab, and welcome to everybody for this very special evening in honor of Zohran Mamdani. I don't approve of political jokes, but I have seen two, you know why? I have seen too many of them get elected. So I will begin by quoting two of my favorite political analysts, in fact, Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart. Colbert dismissed all those voters who did not agree with him about Roe versus Wade, which he thinks refers to the best way of crossing the lake, Roe versus Wade. And Jon Stewart asked a very fundamental question. If con is the opposite of pro, then is Congress the opposite of progress? We used to think that men entered politics solely as a result of being unhappily married. But since Ronald Reagan, we know better. Actors started entering politics by claiming that they are not the typical politician because they don't know how to lie, cheat, or steal. They always had an agent doing that for them. And the consensus after the most recent election in America is that 100% of Americans think that 50% of Americans are out of their minds. This is a country which produces citizens who will cross the ocean to fight for democracy, but they will not cross the road to put in a vote. Why? There's a growing apathy that no matter who comes into office, things will only keep getting worse. I'm a direct witness to this despair because of watching a healthcare system in a dizzying, disorienting, downward spiral for the last 3 decades. A system now on the verge of total collapse. Why are people experiencing this disinterest, discontent, lethargy, this listlessness, this sense of detachment? Our great philosopher, poet Allama Iqbal provided the best diagnosis for this apathy. कोई कारवां से टूटा, कोई बदगुमा हरम से. कोई कारवां से टूटा, कोई बदगुमा हरम से, कि अमीर कारवां में नहीं हुए दिल नवाजी. Some broke away from the caravan, others lost faith in the manzil, the object of desire. Why? Because the leader appears heartless. The leader does not lead with the heart, nor does he care about the feeling of others. What defines an effective leader? It is the heart of the leader. An exquisite sensitivity, deep compassion, empathy. And this is the exact reason why I feel that Zohran Mamdani will make an effective leader. I got to know Zohran through his parents, of course. I moved to New York in 2007 with 13-year-old Shehrazad and was looking for a high school to send her to. I was bewildered by the choices and the varied philosophies of each school. My friend Arjun Appadurai told me to talk to Zohran's dad, Mahmood Mamdani. The response I got from Mahmood by email is worth framing. With the rigor of a Harvard-trained academic, Mahmood listed the top 10 high schools in the city, a sentence or two about their strengths and weaknesses, and ended by describing in detail why Mira and Mahmood chose to send Zohran to a public school. One of the reasons I suspect was that they could almost see his future interest already. In fact, his parents used to call him the Buddha when he was just a little boy. Zohran was born and raised in Kampala, Uganda, moved to New York City when he was 7, graduated from Bronx Science, went on to Bowdoin College, and has spent much of his time since in organizing in and around electoral politics. He ran the paid canvass for a city council race, managed the campaign for a state senate race, and now is running for New York State Assembly in Astoria, Queens. If he wins, he will be the first ever South Asian elected official from New York City, the second Muslim in the Assembly, and the first Ugandan elected official in New York State. I want to tell everyone about my first encounter with Zohran and why I independently felt strongly that he belongs in the sector of public service a long time ago. It was 2003. We were still living in Chicago. I had worked hard to entice Mira to come for the Chicago Humanities Festival. For those of you who don't know, I'm referring to Mira Nair, the great film director, who is Zohran's mom. I had worked hard to entice Mira to come for the Chicago Humanities Festival. Mahmood and Zohran had also come with her. Both Mahmood and Mira had other appointments during the day. 11-year-old Zohran had the choice of hanging out with one of them or go to my apartment where he could spend a few hours playing video games with Scheherazade, who was 9 at the time. He chose the latter. And Sheher and Zohran have been best friends ever since, or friends ever since. Best friend. That evening, Mira gave a riveting talk to the overflowing crowd at the Humanities Festival, ravishing them with her charm, sense of humor, dazzling everyone with her extraordinary talents. At the end, the room was open for a question-answer session. The first lady who stood up, to the dismay of all, proved to be the nightmare that public speakers dread the most. She spoke for a solid 10 minutes, presenting an incoherent thesis about why a Bollywood actress is considered a has-been at 29, something about driving Miss Daisy, and then something about dry skin. At the end, there really wasn't even a real question. When she finally wound down to a finish, Mira made a polite response of some sort, which is entirely forgettable, and moved on to the next question. Believe me, everyone in the audience was relieved, except Zohran. On the way back, he was very quiet and thoughtful in the car. When asked why, he said he felt very sorry for the lady with the no question. He wished people had shown more patience with her, and he wished that Mira had spent more time addressing her, even though she did not have a question. I asked Zohran why he felt she deserved better, and he said, well, Azra auntie, she had paid the same amount of money for the ticket as the rest. She had a right to the time. Now I hope you all agree with me that this young man has a heart. In all the years since then, he has only confirmed those first impressions through demonstrations of exceptional maturity, care, consideration, affection, and by his many, many accomplishments at such a young age. Let us listen to his vision and welcome him with another great Iqbal शेर. नजर से बढ़ के कोई शय नहीं नजर के लिए. नजर से बढ़ के कोई शय नहीं नजर के लिए, मगर ये तब के नजारे भी हों नजर के लिए. There is no greater reward for the eyesight than a vision, but only if the vision is worth it and deserves that eyesight. I assure you, my friends, This young man is truly worthy of your eyesight. All you have to do now is close your eyes but open your hearts, and his message will straight shoot right into your hearts. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Mr. Zohran Mamdani.
That was so lovely. Do you mind if I stand, Azra?
No, that's whatever makes you comfortable.
So, hello everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Zohran Mamdani, and I'm running for New York State Assembly in Assembly District 36. That is in the northwest of Queens. It covers the neighborhoods of Astoria, Ditmar Steinway, and Astoria Heights. So before I get into the specifics of the race and of our policy platform as a campaign, I want to tell you a little bit more about myself and about my family. So in August of 1972, the then president of Uganda, Idi Amin, got on the radio and made an announcement that within 90 days, all Ugandans of South Asian origin were to be expelled from the country. And in the frame of those few minutes, my family's lives changed. They were rendered stateless. And all that they had spent their life building, and all that those who had come before them had spent their lives building and considering as home, was taken from them. And they were made to become refugees. And so they went to England, which is where they had to go. And they lived in a refugee camp. And alongside the difficulties of living in a refugee camp and living in a temporary settlement, whether it be with the skinheads running through the settlement trying to attack as many Muslims as possible, comes additionally having to reckon with the question of what has happened to us and who are we without our home. And that is something that does not simply resolve itself once you leave the camp, because my family did eventually leave the camp and found a more permanent residence in London. And yet my grandfather and grandmother would still go to Gatwick, an airport in London, and they would watch the weekly Sunday flight take off to Entebbe, to Uganda's international airport. And they would go every week and they would wish nothing more than that they could get on that plane and that they could go home. Because not only had they lost their lives, their home, their families, but especially for my grandfather, he lost his sense of self. The man that he was, the man that everyone knew him to be, the man that was thriving, now had simply become someone whose aim was to survive. And his dreams as they had existed had vanished. And so in 1979, Idi Amin was overthrown and my father moved back to Uganda, and soon after my family followed. And I was born in Uganda in 1991. And I inherited that same question, that same reckoning of where is home and who am I? And we moved to this city in 1999. And I found in moving here and in the time since that I would feel at home everywhere, and yet I would feel at home nowhere. Because in Uganda, I was Indian. In India, I was Muslim. In New York City, I was all of those things. And being here, there's still, this illusion, and it's partially a result of settler colonialism, that all of us can become New Yorkers, that all of us can settle into the city. And yet there would be these moments where I would be reminded by someone whose intent was to tell me that you do not belong. And one of those first moments was on 9/11, when, before I knew what had happened, my teacher had pulled me and a Muslim classmate of mine out of the class and told us that something has happened and you may be bullied. And I want you to tell me if that happens. And frankly, I was lucky because most Muslim students in the city were not given that kind of care from their teachers. And yet in that moment, I realized that I was not simply another classmate in a middle school. I was distinct. And there was a marker of that distinction on me. And it was something that I would be reminded of again and again. Something when we came back from a trip abroad, being pulled aside at JFK by immigration agents in a double-mirrored room, sitting me down on my own while my family was outside, and asking me if I had just attended a terrorist training camp. And if I had intentions of attacking this country, and if so, what were those plans? And it's something that has continued in the time since, where a few months ago, I went with a client of mine to a bankruptcy court, and as we're going into the court, the security guard takes me aside and pats me down with additional care, and asks me multiple times if I have any weapons of mass destruction on me. And in these moments, the sense of not knowing where home is, you know, they're amplified by what I would see around me. Because I would turn on the television, and the only people who looked like me in the news or in film or television would be labeled terrorists. And I'd look to the government, and I wouldn't see anyone who looked like us. And instead I would see people who were intent on using us as rhetorical devices, as villains to any problem that this country had. And that issue was exacerbated by the politics that I had and that I continue to have. Because being a Muslim, being a South Asian, a Ugandan, a young man in this city, you already face all of these things. But then when you go outside and you see someone who's homeless, and you ask, not that what did that person do so that they deserve this, but rather, how did we as a society fail so that this person is homeless and has been homeless on the same street for 20 years? There are people who are resistant to that, because that analysis goes up against what this country teaches us, which is that our failures are individual failures, and that there is no responsibility beyond that of the individual for something like that. It is not a social responsibility. And it is something I would feel again when I would say that, you know, if we are all to have human rights, then why are we not all standing against occupations? You know, many of us will stand against certain occupations, but then if I were to bring up Gaza, or if I were to bring up Kashmir, it would be a step too far. And I would be told that that's not within the realm of progressive politics that we're discussing. And I would find myself feeling very isolated. And that's also what capitalism does to us. It makes us feel very isolated, and especially alienated from society at large. And I realized in those moments that some people are born into a home. Some people find a home. But for many others of us, we have to fight for a home. We have to create that home ourselves. And to create that home and to leave the isolation behind, what it requires is to organize. And so I began organizing. I began organizing in high school first, when I found that even in the realm of athletics, we didn't have the justice that we deserved. And so myself and about 20 to 30 other South Asian students at Bronx Science came together and founded our school's first ever cricket team. And we competed in the public school athletic league's inaugural cricket season. And I organized again when I went to college, and I found that the discourse around the occupation and generally around foreign policy at large was lacking. And I co-founded with a friend of mine our college's first Students for Justice in Palestine. And I continued to organize. And when I think of organizing, and I think of creating a sense of home, it really brings me to what the real core is of this campaign, which is about that sense of home and about that sense of belonging. Because there's a writer who I admire named Aisha Siddiqui, and she wrote that, be the person you needed when you were younger. And I think of myself when we first came here, I think of myself in those early years, and I think of all of the other children who have both gone through that and who are going through that today. And they look around and they're facing the same questions decades on. And that sense of home, of belonging, is one that this campaign and that I myself will fight for throughout this whole campaign and beyond. And it is a sense of belonging, beyond simply the sense of belonging, the idea and the image of a home, when I speak of it, I also mean the walls that surround us, the walls that we come home to every day and that we start our day in. Because I work as a foreclosure prevention housing counselor at an organization called Chaya CDC. And I go to work every day, and I work with families, South Asian and Indo-Caribbean families across Queens, who have spent decades in their homes and are now facing foreclosure. And you hear a lot of stories about why people face foreclosure. And a lot of times an emphasis is put on personal mismanagement of funds and really individual mistakes. And then when you meet these families that are going through foreclosure, you hear the truth is far from that. It is a story about employers who scale back hours without notice. It is a story about an unforeseen emergency. It is a story about a medical illness that took away the family's savings and the ability to make monthly payments. And in working in this job, it made me realize that we are judging the people who have been victims of this system, and yet we do not have time to judge the system itself. And then when I go home from my job, I go to my apartment in Astoria, and I spend 50% of the income I make from my job goes to my rent. And I see the same inability to save money in myself and in my neighbors and in my friends for any kind of emergency, such that we would be left without the ability to pay our rent. And I think that, in this campaign, when we're fighting for a sense of belonging and fighting for a home, because for too long, New York City politics has been dictated by a real estate industry. And the consequence of this industry is we've accepted words that have come with no meaning. So we all hear a mayor and we hear politicians who talk about affordable housing. Everybody seems to agree that we need affordable housing. But the example that I'll give you is that in Astoria, on Steinway, there's a new development coming up. And there are 3 quote-unquote affordable housing units. And the cheapest one is a 1-bedroom that will cost you $2,375 a month. And the minimum income requirement is $70,000. And that is what passes for affordable housing today. Because what we've been talking about really is not affordable housing, it's the access to affordable housing that's being provided today. Not even affordable at that. And when I say access, I talk about that because once a month at my job, we have people come in and it's a day where we help them apply for the city's quote-unquote affordable housing units. So you have all, we've all just spoken about the price, but then there will be maybe 100 families who are somehow able to put that together. And they all come and apply and they're elated by the prospect of this kind of stability. And yet only one of them can get that unit. Right? That is access to a right as opposed to a right in and of itself. And so in this campaign, we are fighting for a housing guarantee for all New Yorkers. And that is something that is not simply a pie-in-the-sky vision, it is very much achievable. And it's achievable because the cost of homeless New Yorkers, both the moral and the financial cost, is much higher than it is to keep people in their homes. If you look at the specifics of a cost to put someone in a shelter, and you look at the specifics of a cost of only dealing with a problem at its most emergency level, it is far higher than assisting New Yorkers on the verge of eviction with staying in their homes. And when we change this, when we change this vision of what housing is, we do it at a statewide level. And when we do it at a statewide level, the real appeal for me, the reason that I'm running, is because on my best days I can stop one foreclosure. But a legislator can propose and pass legislation that can impact the lives of millions of New Yorkers. And we have legislation that right now is sitting and waiting to even come to the floor in Albany. But it won't, because the politicians who are there are bankrolled by the very people who profit off of the existing crisis. And I'm running as a Democrat in a Democratic primary on June 23rd of next year. And I'm running against a Democrat who has been in office for a decade. A Democrat who has accepted thousands of dollars over the years from the real estate industry, from developers. And a Democrat who is a part of an organization, the Queens County Democratic Party, which is run by 3 lawyers. Lawyers by the name of Sweeney, Reich, and Bowles. And these lawyers are lawyers who don't live in Queens, they live in Long Island. And they are lawyers who have made millions of dollars from prosecuting foreclosures on behalf of the biggest banks in this country. So when I have a campaign and when we all fight together on this issue of housing, know that to do so means to come up against every institution of power within Astoria and within Queens and within New York State. Because we are not accepting $1 from a real estate developer, from a real estate limited liability corporation, or from a corporate political action committee. Our campaign is funded and made possible by people like you. And we do it in a way that is altogether different from the classic style of fundraising. Because in New York, it is sadly still legal to contribute up to $4,600 to an individual assembly race. And so what politicians typically do is they have a fundraiser, they get 20 developers, they each write a max check, and in one night they've raised $100,000. And then we hear these ideas that that money doesn't corrupt anyone, but we know it does. And so what we're doing is we're building a small dollar recurring donation network where we are asking people to give to this campaign once a month and to give to this campaign what they can, whether it be $25 a month, $50 a month, $100 a month, because in doing so, we will raise $150,000 and we will be able to run a campaign that not only spreads this message to every person in Astoria, but does so while fighting in an equitable way. And what I mean by that is, you know, as Azra Auntie so lovingly talked about the things that I have, some of the things that I have done, I've worked in campaigns. And many campaigns are also places of labor exploitation. Places where people are asked to work 18 to 20 hours even. And they're paid not as an employee, but as a contractor. I've been paid as a contractor, right? And this is the way in which employers find a way out of their responsibilities. And what we are going to do as a campaign is we're not going to continue those practices. We are going to pay the people who work on our staff as employees with all of the protections and the taxes that come with that. And we are going to pay people a living wage while we go out and fight for that same thing for everyone else. Because you cannot continue this contradiction that has existed between one's rhetoric and one's actions. And so I thank all of you so much for coming today. I'm very excited. Azra Auntie said we're going to do a bit of a Q&A. And really, it's such a pleasure to meet all of you, to be here with you, and to build this campaign for a better New York together. Thank you.
We are open to questions, so comments.
Okay.
Shazia.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Shazia first.
Please up a little.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very nice of you. Thank you very much. It was an exceptionally fine pitch for an election campaign, and I think you keep up with it, and I'm sure you'll succeed. Whatever you said appeals to any normal, rational human being. That goes without saying. But how you pitch it to the voters in general, etc., is important. But my question is, how important is money in this thing? And what do you do with that money? We were talking about it a little earlier on in the context of the US elections. What does, in Astoria, how much money it pours in, and how does it get spent?
So I think that's a great question. Thank you so much. So when I talked about the aim of the... Sorry?
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, so my understanding of the question is, what does the money you raise go towards? And what does the money you raise, how does it help your campaign, and how necessary are those funds? So let me first say, I have no doubt that I will be outraised and I will be outspent by my opponent. There's no question of that. My opponent had $100,000 on the day that I filed to run, already. And my opponent has never been challenged in 10 years, ever since they came into office. And I'm sure they will be fundraising very actively. Now, the money that we want to raise, the $150,000, it is the amount of money that we see as necessary to run a lean, mean campaign, but one that is equitable. And what that money goes to is the following things. We aim to employ 2 people on staff, so paying those people a livable wage. So payroll is one of the major expenses. Another major expense is creating the literature which we will have when talking to voters. See, because as we talked about, we don't want to continue the contradictions of the past. We want to make sure that when we're making this literature, we're doing so in a fair way. We're working with unions to create this literature. And so you have a major expense to create that many pieces of lit. Then ideally, when you run a campaign, you want to send voters about at least 2 mailers, so that at some point in the campaign, they won't simply be contacted by you in person, but they will open their mail and they'll find a mailer from you telling you about their campaign, telling them about your campaign, rather. So spending that money for those 2 mailers and the mailing cost. And then another major expense is an office. So to really build a campaign, what we also seek to do is to build a community. To fight for a home, we want to have a home in the crucial months of the campaign. And to have an office costs about, at the best, $3,000 to $4,000 a month. And the necessity of having an office is that it gives people a place to go to get into the campaign. And when people see you as part of the community, it allows people to dream of connecting with you. And so when I think of those four categories, it's payroll, literature that we pass out in person, mailers that we send out to voters, and then an office space. Those are the major four things. You know, the money that we fundraise is not going to make sure that I'm, you know, living a high life for the next 7 months. It is going to make sure that we can, this is the lowest amount of money we need to run the campaign that we believe we have to win this election. And when I say outspent, my opponent may even have $1 million. But that doesn't change the reality of what it costs to pay people well and what it costs to put our words and our images on a piece of paper so that people can know what we're talking about. And we're already doing that. 3 times a week, we are on the subway platform in Astoria. And as people go to work from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., I'm right there with my friend Jahan, who's in the back over there, and other friends of ours on the campaign. And we're talking to people, and we're saying, excuse me, I'm so sorry to disturb you, but I'm running for New York State Assembly here in Astoria, and I'm a housing counselor. And the person will say, you know, I have to get on the train. I'll say, well, I see that it's 6 minutes away, and I'll leave you as soon as it comes. Because the MTA is horrible, but the only good thing is that I now have a captive audience. Right? And in today's world, this is the town center, is the subway platform. And too often campaigns are run in an antiquated way where you only knock on the door of someone who voted in the last 3 primaries. But this campaign is about meeting everyone where they are, whether it's the subway platform, whether it's the park, and telling people that not only do they have an assembly person, which many people have no idea that they do, but that this is what this assembly person has been doing for the last decade, and it's not how it has to be.
I just want to say one more thing.
Please.
Volunteers, it's obviously. But the best way to campaign would be not to talk to them on the platform. Jump onto the train. These people are coming from Astoria, captive audience, hop off on the next station, come back, and
we've actually done that by mistake. we want to finish a conversation and we get trapped in the
I would love to hear what you have to say.
Well, I have a 2-part question. If
Please.
So one is my own. At this point, has any, I know the establishment in a party is very important. Has any existing either legislative assembly member or former member endorsed you? That's my question. My daughter who lives in Albany has a question. She's a med student who's working on the food allergy awareness bill that Linda Rosenthal put forward. She's the one who conceived the bill and helped draft it. It didn't get through the assembly, got through the Senate and through all the committees. She wants to know that if you are elected, will you support it if we don't get it through this particular? It's for restaurants to ensure that they have training for their staff and that there's accuracy in the menus on allergens.
So let's start with the first part, which is about who has endorsed us so far. So we launched this campaign about a month and a half ago. And in that time, I've had meetings with multiple legislators, all of whom are interested in endorsing us. And what these legislators typically wait for is they want to always see your viability. And the way that most politicians understand viability is funds raised. And so when the first filing period is January 11th, it closes. And that will be the day when reporters will look through the filings, politicians will look at it, and they'll say, okay, maybe this is safe for me, maybe it's not. But beyond politicians, I'm in the final process of being endorsed by 2 organizations. One is the Muslim Democratic Club of New York, which is where I've been a board member for the last few years, and I've been actively working to empower Muslim political power across our city. And it's an organization that endorsed and in the recent race for district attorney for Tiffany Caban, where she came 55 votes within winning the district attorney's race. And the other organization that I'm in the final process of the endorsement is the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, who many people know in relation to having endorsed Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is a congressman in part of this district and part of Astoria as well, and also very much behind Tiffany Caban. And I'm very confident of that. On Saturday, we should hear it about 2 p.m. And I think that will also make people sit up and think about our campaign who otherwise would simply be waiting for funds. The second question. So what I would say is, there's two things I would say to that. One is, I think that the way that the system works in Albany right now is that it's basically an incumbency protection system, where a legislator is allowed to co-sponsor a bill, knowing that that bill will never get to the floor. And then they can tell everyone that I'm a supporter, but it's just not coming to the floor. But the battle is to get it to the floor, and the person who decides that is the Speaker of the Assembly. And the problem is that everyone who's within that institution has the incentive to play nice with the Speaker, because the Speaker is who is in charge of their bills in the future. And the way that we make that change as one member of a 150-person legislative body is that you create public pressure, both within the body and outside the body. You make it untenable for that bill to not come to the floor. I can't say that I've read this bill, but it sounds extremely reasonable. I mean, I don't even understand what the opposition to it is. But a lot of times what happens is that if a bill is not backed by a special interest group, it will not be considered.
Well, it's only been a first-year attempt, so I'm sure that these bills do multiple-year attempts. But I will be meeting with Linda Rosenthal regarding the bill, and I'll bring you up.
Please
because,
do.
You know, she has good positions on the rental issue that you espouse, and her endorsement might be an important one.
It would really be great. Thank you so much.
Yes, Jaffer. Paul
Super
next.
interesting platform, and I really appreciate the way you presented it. Out of curiosity, is there extant legislature that you are looking to sponsor through joining the state assembly, or are you generating around housing in particular and the foreclosure stuff that you're working on, and affordable housing as well, or are you starting from scratch, so to speak?
So there are, thank you so much for that. There are yes to both, I would say, right? Is that there is currently legislation that is yet to come to the floor, again, because of the same issue that we're talking about. One of it is called good cause eviction. Good cause eviction is a piece of legislation that would change the laws regarding housing in terms of market rate tenants. So in Queens, 57% of tenants live in a market rate unit. And right now, if you live in a market rate unit and you pay your rent every month, at the end of your lease, you have no guarantee of lease renewal. You could be kicked out of your apartment for no reason at all. And you also have no guarantee of how much your landlord will increase the rent on you. There's no stipulation of this or that percentage. Good cause provides a framework so that you would only be able to be evicted for good cause, and that rent increases beyond a certain amount would have to be justified to a judge. And I fundamentally believe in that bill. There's another bill called the Home Stability Support Act. That is a bill that earlier I was talking about how it's cheaper to keep people in their homes than to have them be evicted and then try and deal with the issue. This bill would expand New York State assistance to families in danger of eviction, tenants specifically. And I very much support that bill as well. Then there's new legislation, because a lot of questions that we'll come up against is the eternal question of how will you pay for this, right? And I think one of the main things is there are a lot of bills. First, there's one called the pied-à-terre tax. So there's a tax that was proposed last year to place a tax on secondary properties above the value of $5 million. So you live in one home and then you have an additional home in the city, and that's the value of it, and that we would place an additional tax on that home. And it was fought down by the real estate industry. I would fight tooth and nail for that tax. There's an additional tax which, as a foreclosure prevention counselor, I see that again and again in Queens we have neighborhoods where a significant percentage of purchases are being made not by families but by financial speculators and investment groups. And a lot of these groups are seeking to purchase and then flip the property within the same year. And there's something called a flip tax, which would levy a 15% tax on any purchase and sale within the same 12 months. And I think that that's critical, because Queens used to be the borough where families, especially from South Asia, would come to build their lives in this country. And now they're being priced out of that borough by groups like Blackstone, right? By LLCs that have names that we can't actually look into who owns them. And that change in mindset of a house not being a home but rather being a place of investment, That is what I want to fight against. With that existing legislation, and then eventually in the fight to guarantee all of this housing through legislation that we will put forward.
Thank you. Dr. Paul Graywall, go ahead.
A couple of quick rapid-fire questions.
Please.
So what does the current primary voting block look like? How many people are there roughly? What would be the number of people you would have to bring in from who are non-traditional primary voters in order to capture the seat?
So I'm going to... Yes, I got very excited.
And then are they all single issue voters as far as you know?
Yes, so if I forget any part of your question, please let me know. So I'm going to start from... can you remind me the first part? You forgot the... Okay, I'll go over... Sorry?
How many total voters?
Okay, so each assembly person represents... I don't know if it's got much louder. Represents about 140,000 people. And within that amount of people, in Astoria, there are about 50,000 active Democrats. Of those 50,000, maybe about 15 to 14 will show up for this election. And so it will take 7,000 voters to win this election. Now, I was a very active organizer for the Tiffany Caban campaign. Tiffany Caban had a radical platform on criminal justice, and we were told again and again that this is too far, that this is not possible, that this is not what voters, this is not where voters are actually at. Tiffany Caban won 76% of the assembly district I am running in. And that is on a platform that we mirror in our criminal justice policies. So there exists already an electorate that has voted for candidate after candidate who espouses similar beliefs to us. But our belief is that not simply to replicate what has come before, but to expand that electorate, as you said. And what I'm doing every night when I go home after fundraising up until 9 p.m., I open up the voter file of all 50,000 Democrats, and I go through it. And I bold every Muslim name, and I highlight in yellow every South Asian name. And the reason I do that is because there is a thriving Muslim community in Astoria, Arab and Bangladeshi. There are a lot of Bangladeshi, Tibetans, Nepalis in Astoria. People who have not been engaged in the political process through the fault of the campaigns. Because campaigns will only knock on the doors of someone who they believe is the most likely to come out and vote in a primary. But so many of these voters, if there's never been a challenge to the incumbent, who are they going to go vote for? The incumbent every year? There's no choice on the ballot. And so what it is it's our job, and what we're going to do is go to these families and knock on the door and tell them that not only do they have a choice, but they have a candidate from their community that is running on these platforms, things that we've been told for too long are not acceptable. And so we intend to dramatically increase the rate of participation of both Muslim voters and South Asian voters. Because it is pretty astounding that in 2019, New York City has never elected a South Asian elected official at any level. City Council, State Assembly, State Senate, Congress, any level. There's never been a South Asian in New York City. And that is just mind-blowing. For all the myths we tell ourselves about this city and what we cherish and what we love, and there are too many voters who are at home right now who don't know that they have a chance to change that.
Zohran,
yes.
You are in a very enviable position of having one parent who's Muslim and one parent who's Hindu.
Yes.
So in Astoria, you could go to places, I don't know whether, this is speaking out of ignorance, I don't know whether there's a Hindu society or something, but there are all these Hindu temples and all, and they would all vote for you because you are Mira Nair's son. No, it's a fact. You have to use everything you can get.
Some of them might have seen Kama Sutra and they might have
you have to use everything you can get.
No, I intend on using everything. And you know, when I highlight Muslim communities, it's not to say that we will not engage other communities. No, but within Astoria, there isn't as much of a Hindu community, but we will still be going door to door. And I very much, you know, through Chaya, have been connected to the South Asian community across all religions in Queens. And so we will be going to all of the uncles and the aunties. Because the only way this is possible is by doing it all together. Because I cannot raise these funds and this interest on my own. And I have no intention of doing so because we have too many politicians and campaigns where the purpose is to feed into this ego-driven idea of one hero. And the reality is that it takes all of us, and the work that will actually get us there is collective work. So I'll definitely be telling on them, if they like Monsoon Wedding, vote for me. If they read Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, I'm a bad Muslim, vote for me. We will be talking about everything. Yes?
I was just wondering, do you have time to register new voters, like
Yes.
younger people, because 18-year-olds would be a really good population for you, because like for the Obama campaign, we lived in the deep South and everybody was a Republican. So we went door to door, every African American household, and begged whoever could register to vote, and we turned Virginia blue that year. So I'm just saying, I think high schoolers coming out and all would be a really good target population.
For sure. First of all, thank you for having done that. And one of the things, and one of the things that we're doing is not only registering new voters, but there are a lot of voters in New York who are registered in other parties. And it's either by mistake or without an understanding of what it means. So we have a lot of people who are registered as independents, registered as blank, registered for, whatever it may be. And as a result of that, they cannot participate in primaries. And in a democratic city like New York, the general election is pretty unimportant for most places. Once you win the primary, the race is over. And so we have many voters who've been disenfranchised out of their ability to vote in these elections. And so when I was talking about building that list, we are also going to people registered outside of the party to bring them into the party so that they have a voice in every election. And then, speaking about young people, one of the critical points of our platform, and I spoke a lot about housing, is about school integration. So New York City has the most segregated schools in America. 68% of students in New York City high schools are black or Latino. And at the top public high schools in the city, the specialized high schools, only 9% are black or Latino. We're talking about basically a 60% difference. And integration is a critical point for me, and it's something that I will fight very hard for. And in doing so, we are finding and building alliances with student groups. Because what students are doing today is inspiring and really courageous. There's a high school called Beacon High School, where students recently staged a walkout earlier this week because of the disproportionate funding that whiter and wealthier schools receive compared to blacker and poorer schools. There are also students who are doing a weekly walkout. And so these are the kinds of issues and groups we want to amplify. And we very much are going to have a very young focus in terms of the point at which you can participate. You should not only participate if you're 18 and registered, because I was participating in New York City elections as a green card holder, right? Not as a voter, but I would be canvassing. I would be talking to people. I only got my citizenship early last year. And this idea that there's room for everyone is something that is key for us to say, that not only should New York be for every person who wants to call it home, but our campaign should be as well. So I have friends who, they'll say, I have social anxiety, I don't want to talk to strangers at 7 a.m. on the subway platform. And my answer is not to say, well, okay, thank you for your time. My answer is to say, what is it that you want to do? If you want to make a graphic, make a graphic. If you want to make a video, make a video. If you want to help amplify this message in any way, because it'll take every single thing to get through here. It'll be a perfect storm of things as opposed to just one strategy executed well. Yes?
Dr. Kanti Rai.
Having listened to your presentation and having listened to this short, quick fire questions, I think you have a real, new, important, doable message, and the concentration of this discussion has very correctly focused upon getting the people, 145,000 people, to vote. There have been too much neglect of the traditional non-participating citizens in our society. And we don't go after them properly and repeatedly and convince them that it is in their interest to elect a person like you. And I would hope that you also might look for not only friends, but in the event that you become a member of New York State Legislature, already start to think about the potential cooperative other members, because you cannot have success in getting your point across unless you have a body. As we have seen in the House, in Alexandra's campaign, and people said that there was no chance that she will win in the primary against a well-established, long-time, unopposed Democratic member of the House. And she proved that to be wrong. And just as you said, the example of Tiffany, I think we start small, but you have a message and try to get people to become interested first and remember for a long time that there is an election and bring them out. And not only from the other parties, but within Democratic Party.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I think that is, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think, we've spoken about the ways in which we will engage voters, the ways in which we will reach out to voters that have been outside the party, but I think you raise a great point, which is about building coalitions with legislators in Albany. There are some legislators who will ideologically be opposed to whatever we propose, but there are many legislators who are looking to see an alternative way of fundraising and of operating as a politician. And what we've seen is last year, there was a sea change in the kinds of Democrats that went to Albany. And suddenly there is an opening for a progressive vision for this state that previously there was not. And there is now a newfound willingness to confront a governor who has not shown the courage and the bravery it takes to implement these actual policies. And so when beyond the campaign, inshallah, we get to the assembly, once we get there, I know that an individual can make an impact, but a collective can make a change. And it is through the building of that collective that we will actually be able to not only pass this legislation, but transform the culture of the legislature entirely.
There's a question back there.
There is a question?
That lady?
No, hand is just up.
Oh.
Yes, yes.
Please.
Well, let's give him a hand. I'm afraid I always have the last word.
Of course.
Your house.
I have a very favorite writer, Annie Dillard. She got the Pulitzer Prize in 1976 for her great book, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, one of the most gorgeously written books about nature. For many years she didn't write again, and then last year I think she came out, or a couple of years ago, with a collection of essays which is called The Abundance. And I heard her on NPR being interviewed by Melissa Block, who asked her, Miss Dillard, why did you call your collection of essays The Abundance? And she said, well, for many years I have a habit that when I come across an interesting quotation, something meaningful, I jot it down in my journal. And I read this thing in the Quran which says, they will question thee about what they should expend. The word is not spend, expend, what you can do without. They will question thee, what should they expend? Say the abundance. Give it all away. You will be filled from behind. And what she said it appealed to me as a writer, because many times a sentence comes into my mind and I say, no, I must save it for that essay, which I'm planning to write next month. But then I think of this quotation from the Quran, the abundance, give it all away, you will get more. And you know, this is the point I want to make before we resort to Abraham Lincoln, who said, look, anyone will vote if you invite them over and give them truth and reason for why they should vote, and also serve them beer and dinner. Before we go for dinner, I want to make sure that while this young man has been terribly polite by not directly asking for your support, I'm going to ask for it. I think it is incumbent upon us as responsible citizens of the world, which means of New York, we need to support good voices, especially young voices who are speaking with so much, not just confidence, but heart. And speaking of heart, one of the problems is the heart tells you to do one thing, the mind tells you to do another. You may want to give, but your checkbook is telling you something else. So there is the advice of one of our great poets, which I will translate in a second. But in Urdu he says, Aqlo dil apni apni kahe jab khumar, अक्ल दिल अपनी अपनी कहें जब खुमार, अक्ल की सुनिए दिल का कहा कीजिए. When the mind and the heart tell you two opposing things, listen to the mind, but do what your heart tells you. So I suggest all of you sign up with Zohran and Jahan, who's here ready with the clipboard. Please give recurring donations for a minimum of 7 months, because the election is in June and we hope that Zohran will win. Any amount, $10, $20, and I hope that whoever can afford more, I would like to request those who can afford more at least give $100 a month, if not more, for 7 months. The recurring idea is very important. I think we are ready for dinner, so I'd like to end by thanking all of you for coming, thanking you in advance for supporting Zohran, thanking Mahmood, who was late but arrived to support his son.
Just
Delighted
in time,
to have you.
before you started.
Yes. And before we completely disband, I want to acknowledge the presence of a very special personality, our Prime Minister, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's daughter, Sanam Bhutto, is amongst us tonight. So let us give her a hand. And Sanam, I'd like to end by reciting a qata for you. So my uncle Mazahir Jafri wrote this when your father was fighting for his first election in the 70s. इसने किसी को उसने किसी को दिया है वोट, हमने जो मुस्तहक है उसी को दिया है वोट, भुट्टो को वोट हमने मज़ाहिर नहीं दिया. It is very dramatic build up. इसने किसी को उसने किसी को दिया है वोट, हमने जो मुस्तहक है उसी को दिया है वोट, भुट्टो को वोट हमने मज़ाहिर नहीं दिया, हमने तो जुल्फ़िकार अली को दिया है वोट. This one voted for someone, that one voted for another person. We did not vote for, but I voted for the most deserving person. I did not vote for Bhutto. I voted for Zulfikar Ali, which was the first, of course, the two first names of Mr. Zade Bhutto, but also Zulfikar Ali is the sword of Imam Ali. We are delighted you were able to join us, Sanam, and would you like to support Zohran by saying a few words?
I definitely would support him.
It's wonderful to have you, and we hope that everybody in the audience will rise to the challenge and support Zohran Mamdani. So thank you.